late 20s, there begins to be a precipitous decline in the amount of gray matter and a reduction in the raw intelligence that becomes increasingly sharp in one's later years. This turns out to be an obsolete and really unnecessarily bleak view of human potential, because now it turns out, according to research, that the brain is remarkably plastic and malleable. And it has the capability of forging new connections and learning new things, learning new skills, and developing the gray matter throughout life, if it is properly exercised, if it is exposed to the type of experience that engages the brain holistically and develops the total brain. Well, what research has shown that among the whole range of human experiences, from the study of the arts, the study of science, or the study of language, or any experience of any kind, the experience of pure consciousness is unique among the whole range of human experiences, and that only this experience of unbounded awareness, deep inner silence, engages the total brain, engages the brain holistically, and brings global EEG coherence for the balanced development of the total brain. The next chart shows one very striking application of this discovery, still yet on the individual level. In a moment we'll talk about society. What we see in education today all too often, due to the levels of stress in our schools, particularly in our congested inner cities, and due to the predominance of alcohol dependence and drug abuse, even among younger children, at an age where stress-related illnesses like high blood pressure are increasingly childhood diseases, no longer limited to adults. So during this time of increasing stress, and due to education in its current form, the brain is typically not developed in a holistic way. Instead, what you see all too often are what are called functional holes in the brain, shown here on the right. This is the brain of a violent offender, a prison inmate, and this is a so-called SPECT brain imaging technology that measures blood flow to the brain. And what you see on the right are what appear to be holes in the brain. Now, these holes are not actually gaps in the gray matter, but are so-called functional holes, parts of the brain that simply aren't firing. And because they're not consuming energy, they're not being refreshed with new oxygen and new nutrients. The blood flow shuts down. You also see on the right-hand side a clustering of these functional holes at the top of the chart, which is the front of the brain, the critical prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex is supposed to be our rational filter against primitive, aggressive, impulsive, violent behavior. It is the area of planning and judgment and moral reasoning. And when it shuts down, when it is no longer firing, as is so often the case, the result of education today, that means that individual doesn't have the natural filter against this sort of violent, impulsive, self-destructive behavior. However, even among such violent offenders, and many, many such studies have been done in prisons throughout the world today, even in violent offenders with these entrenched functional holes, this extreme metabolic imbalance in the brain, the meditative experience, which is so easily learned, in fact, is very, very popular in a prison setting because these prisons are pressure cookers of stress, and everyone, even the guards, are just keenly desirous of any relief from that pressure. In the prisons even, the experience of meditation is so easy and brings immediate relief and engages the total brain. And by engaging the brain holistically, restores blood flow to the entire brain, restores metabolic balance, and over a period of time, and we're just talking about a matter of months, not years, the proper balanced functioning of the brain is restored, as shown on the left-hand side of the same chart. Before leaving this study, let me dwell for a moment, just for a moment, on the potential impact of just this on the peace of our world and on the subject of crime in the world. Let's take a case study of Senegal in Africa, French-speaking country, which had, some decade or so ago, an extreme prison crisis of extreme overcrowding, leading to almost daily riots. And the cause of the intense crowding within the prisons of Senegal was the rate of return to prison was about 90%, which is a very high rate of recidivism, even by U.S. standards. So most people leaving the prisons were not rehabilitated and very quickly migrated back into the penal system, back into the prison system. Perhaps out of desperation, the Minister of Justice decided there was nothing to lose. Why not introduce instruction in the Transcendental Meditation program of His Holiness Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, which is, again, by far the most extensively researched, widely practiced, and broadly prescribed of any such program in the world. Why not introduce this into the prison system on a voluntary basis? And very, very quickly, Transcendental Meditation spread like wildfire, and before long, every prison inmate and every prison guard were enjoying the benefits of Transcendental Meditation, and within a very short time, about 14 weeks, the rate of return to prison dropped from about 90% to 6%. Before very long, a third of the prisons had closed due to lack of repeat clients. Such a marked transformation in the field of criminology in that country led to a television broadcast by the Minister of Justice, who was speaking at a podium in the presence of the President of the country, who was seated nearby. And the Minister of Justice was actually weeping on national television, explaining how the introduction of Transcendental Meditation completely transformed criminal justice in his country and completely transformed the country. So even in this very limited perspective that we've discussed until now, and we'll move on in just a moment, just introducing Transcendental Meditation in a very limited way in the field of criminal rehabilitation is enough to rehabilitate and essentially all but eliminate this vicious cycle of crime and the punishment of crime that exists in every country today. That in itself would have a dramatic impact on crime levels in any country, and it is so cost-effective and easy to do. But let us leave for a moment this phenomenon of the physiological benefits and the rehabilitative benefits and the effects on the brain of Transcendental Meditation and consider more fundamentally now the field of consciousness and the field of collective consciousness, and how we can very efficiently handle and really palpably transform the collective consciousness and quality of life of an entire country, sufficient to render a country free from war and effectively invincible. That means impervious to war, as we will see. Well, let us go back to the premise we introduced 20 minutes ago and consider this chart again for a moment of the fundamental capability of the human nervous system to experience this field of pure consciousness within, this maximally expanded state of human comprehension in which human awareness identifies with the unified field. Well, this is a remarkable discovery, that human awareness has the capability of traversing the total range of natural law from superficial to profound, and human awareness can open to the direct experience of this field of unity within. This essentially establishes consciousness in its fundamental nature as a universal field. Many, from Heisenberg to Schrödinger, have speculated that consciousness at its basis was a universal field, a field that we all share in common. That, yes, of course, we have our localized awareness, our individual minds and intellects and egos and physical bodies, of course. But all of this, according to Heisenberg, for example, was just a wave, a localized wave, an individual wave on an unbounded ocean of consciousness, an ocean of existence. And that individual waves on this ocean, in a sense, correspond to individual consciousnesses, individual minds, individual physiologies. It seems, on the one hand, rather common sense that the most fundamental reality of individual existence, which is what? Our own inner consciousness, our own subjectivity, that one abstract aspect of our existence which never changes, which has been the same since birth, even though our beliefs have changed, our environments have changed, our occupations have changed, our minds and bodies have certainly changed. Something about our life has been beyond change, changeless. That abstract aspect of life that never changes is our very subjectivity, the field of consciousness itself, which is open to direct experience, no longer speculation, no longer philosophical exploration, but open to direct experience in this most expanded, silent state of human consciousness, where consciousness alone exists, free to explore its unbounded nature. So, this fundamental capability of human consciousness to identify with the unified field, and this identity of this field of consciousness at the basis of mind, and this unified field at the basis of matter, the equivalence of these two fields is of fundamental importance. And I wanted to spend perhaps 5 minutes with you in exploring this fundamental and important identity. It is important because when it comes to phenomena of collective consciousness and the exploration of the dynamics of the collective consciousness of society, it is important to understand that the collective consciousness of society has a physical foundation, that there is a fundamental field of consciousness in which all the individual members of society simply represent localized excitations. Is that really true? That human awareness can experience this unbounded field of existence, the unified field? And the answer is yes. First of all, if we examine in this chart for just one instant the fundamental qualities of the unified field of physics as derivable from the Lagrangian of the superstring, which this chart does, and I know that it's not really possible to read this chart in detail on your video screen, so I will send it to all of our participating members by post. But the qualities of the unified field are the qualities of pure consciousness. There's a qualitative identity, qualitative correspondence. And without going deeply into it, let me just mention that the unified field of physics is a field of intelligence. It is the fountainhead of all the laws of nature. The laws of nature are the orderly principles governing the behavior of our universe. These orderly principles or laws of nature are what give nature its orderliness, that make it predictable, that make it intelligible to the mind. Since the unified field is the most concentrated field, because the unified field is the unified fountainhead of all these laws of nature, it must itself be the most concentrated field of intelligence in nature. And mathematically, you can certainly show that it is. But not just intelligence, dynamic intelligence. Because the quantum principle guarantees increasing dynamism at fundamental scales. The uncertainty principle says that the deeper you go into the structure of nature, from the atomic to the nuclear to subnuclear levels, the more dynamic, intensely dynamic nature becomes. That is why, for example, nuclear power is 1,000,000 times more powerful than chemical energy. Because chemical energy is based upon the manipulation of atoms in a molecule. Nuclear power is based upon the manipulation of the nucleons in a nucleus. 1,000,000 times smaller, 1,000,000 times more fundamental, and hence 1,000,000 times more powerful than chemical energy. Like that, due to the uncertainty principle, the deeper you go, the more profoundly energetic nature becomes. And at the level of the unified field, the Planck scale of 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, which is the ultimate time and distance scale, that energy density becomes essentially infinite. So the unified field is a concentrated field of dynamic intelligence and self-aware. This quality of self-awareness, or the non-abelian property of self-interaction or nonlinearity, present in the unified field, is not present, for example, at more superficial levels. The electromagnetic force, for example, the field of light, doesn't have this nonlinear self-aware property. Two flashlight beams will pass right through each other with no interaction, no scattering, no awareness whatsoever of each other's presence. You can perform this experiment at home. In contrast, the unified field responds dynamically to its own presence due to its non-abelian property or nonlinear property of self-interaction. And it's a very good thing that the unified field is self-aware, self-interacting, because there's nothing else down there for it to interact with. it is due to its own dynamical self-interaction that it systematically generates the diversified laws of nature governing